So your conscience and mind, biblically, is the place where an awareness is developed for what is transgression and sin. Where our guilt comes from. The Bible talks about it. So in your conscience is where that awareness of when you do the wrong thing, and because it realizes it's wrong, from the conscience springs guilt. Okay? Those two things are working together. And that conscience is shaped by lots of things. It doesn't have a will of its own. It has your mind and your eyes and your ears, but it's not self-running. It's not autonomous. You need to see the conscience a bit like one of those old cameras where you slid the slide into the back and you opened up the lens for it to draw its image in, and you closed the lens and the picture was then embossed. That's the conscience. What you see, what you hear affects what you think, and those things travel down and impress upon your conscience what is right and what is wrong. And therefore, when it's something wrong, guilt and shame appear. And when it's something right, peace appears. The conscience. Romans 2:15 tells us that the conscience pronounces a verdict in our lives of the way we've lived and the way we've behaved. Guilty or not guilty. The conscience pronounces it. And it is this, friends, that our text is addressing. Our guilty conscience and our shame. That's what's in view this morning. And so back to these people who love God, who are struggling, who know they're forgiven, but guilt and shame seem to be knocking at their door. And you can imagine some of those pastoral meetings, can't you? You can imagine some of the conversations on the way home from church between husbands and wives and families and friends. The things that leak out of us that betray our conscience. Things like, I know the cross deals with sin, with my sin, but I'm not sure I'm good enough for God or worthy of his love. Anyone had those thoughts? A huge amount of people. There's some stories I could tell you that I cannot share for those children in the room this morning when those things aren't applied the gospel to. Or maybe the words, I know I'm forgiven, but I just cannot forgive myself. Probably one of the most common conversations that I would hear. Or maybe all those right theological words come out. I'm justified. I am sanctified by the Spirit. I am full of Christ. It's total forgiveness. But below the surface level conversations, there is something amiss. Because for all the right thinking, there seems to be this lack of delight in God. And there's another guilt that then flows off that, right? I should be a joyful Christian, but I'm not a joyful Christian. And so in that moment, we're kind of faced with something. And most of us, I think, most of the time, go to our coping mechanisms and deploy them to quell our conscience. Things we've always done. A kind of fake it till you make it approach. Let's just say the right thing and keep pushing through and we're going to be okay. That's what it seems like this church that are being written to are doing. And that would make them just like us. Just like us. You think how many coping mechanisms are deployed? We could find them in our own lives, find them maybe as we peel through the pages of Scripture, though Scripture's not a pastoral theological handbook. It's God writing to his people about things that are happening. Not always all the details are there that we would like. But think about what would happen normally when our conscience makes us uneasy. We can block it out. Deny it. Deny, no, I don't feel guilty, I'm not ashamed. Just block it out, never happened. We judge other people, we blame shift, move things around. I know I've done this, but can you believe what has done. Self-absolution. Well, I only did it because... So we try and placate our conscience. Or we kind of use kind of Christian spirituality as this big sticking plaster. We kind of say, I'm forgiven, so therefore I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to pretend like the guilt doesn't exist. But it does. Because just saying it doesn't deal with it. And so we try and use God to run from God, trying to heal our hearts. Bring us into his freedom. Or we pursue religious behavior. We over-spiritualize everything. And we do religious things to cleanse ourselves from guilt and discomfort. We do rituals and pilgrimages, and depending on what tradition you would fall from, that would look very differently. Evangelicals have rituals, friends. They're no different from any other Christian tradition. We increase our quiet times when our guilt increases. We're going to serve a little bit harder. We're going to unhitch ourselves from historic liturgy by creating a new one and not even realizing it. We're going to go on pilgrimage. I just need to go to the Holy Land. If I go to Jerusalem, then I'll feel better. And I only want to get baptized in the River Jordan. Feels like a ritual pilgrimage to me. Or if I go to this church, and when I go to Westminster Abbey, I feel it. And so I make my pilgrimage there. Or for those who may have grown up in different contexts, they climbed on their knees all the way up the hill to the Catholic Church on the hill to then get to the top and say their Hail Marys and pray their rosaries. But guilt still remained. Non-Christians do these things, don't they, when they feel guilty? Now in our culture, everyone's trying to remove their bad energy. What they mean is guilt. So they go for healing baths and trying to breathe in the universe and do strange yoga poses and go to hippie retreats and try and hear from the dead and buy crystals to transfer all this stuff that's going on. They're trying to placate their conscience, but nothing's working. And for this congregation of Jewish converts, the temptation that they have is slightly different from ours. Theirs is to practice Jewish ritual and pilgrimage, and that's evident in our text. It's evident by the challenge that is coming. Because they were trying to remove their guilt and shame by trying to connect contemporary Jewish cultic practice, so worship practice, and adding it alongside their newfound love for Jesus as a means to remove their guilt. Rather than letting Jesus do his work and understanding his gospel, they're saying, but I need a quick fix. I need to solve it. It's uncomfortable. So maybe I should just add a little bit of this. Because after all, it's kind of fairly Old Testament, and we're all people of the book. And that's where their thinking is taking them. And so it appears throughout the Old Testament and now in the first century, by what comes in our text, there seems to be a distinct misunderstanding of why God even gave his people Israel a tabernacle to worship him in.